The Torah portion this week tells us a fascinating story of the king, the Moabite king, whose name was Balak, who was given an opportunity to assist the Jewish people as they navigated their way through the desert and attempted to enter into the promised land. But Balak declined this opportunity. And not only did he decline the opportunity, but he sought to undermine and destroy the Jewish people and any attempt to enter the promised land. Now, Balak took a slightly different approach than the typical enemies of the Jewish people, the typical challenges the Jewish people had faced from their enemies. Balak did not seek to undermine the Jewish people with physical force, but rather with mystical or spiritual force. And what he did was hire some Midianite prophets, specifically Bilam, who was a Gentile Midianite prophet, and he asked him to come and curse the Jewish people to try and break their internal spiritual strength, which would eventually lead to their deterioration and demise. Now, what's interesting about this is that initially the Moabite and Midianite nations were actually arch enemies and fought against each other. But in this point in time, in order to attack and undermine the Jewish people, they made friends to collaborate against the Jewish people. They say politics makes strange bedfellows. This is an example of how hate makes strange bedfellows. And their common hate for the Jewish people united them to find a way to undermine the Jewish people. Bilam is hired, and through some negotiation back and forth is invited to go out to the vista points above where the Jewish people are camping out and observe their tents, observe where they are camping, and set his gaze upon the Jewish people. And in doing so, he would be able to direct his curses to have impact on the Jewish people. But what happens is, as he goes to the first vista point, he is forced to utter blessings. And Balak is quite disappointed. And he offers him to go to another vista point, where perhaps this will give a new perspective, a new vantage point, where he'll be able to foresee the vulnerability, the spiritual vulnerability of the Jewish people and curse them. But again, in the second and in the third place, where he attempted this curse, it all turned out that he was forced to utter blessings instead of curses. What are the blessings that he uttered? Interestingly, they are very profound blessings. Many of them have deep mystical teachings and profound ideas of Jewish value. But one specific one, which we'll focus on today, is a blessing that we actually say in the prayers every single day. You may be familiar with the words, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov. How good are your tents, O Jacob. Mishkanotecha Yisrael, your dwelling places, O Israel. Bilam observed and noticed the way the Jewish people were camping out in the desert, the way their tents were arranged in a particular format, in a particular pattern that caught his interest, and noticed that this is actually expressing a virtue of the Jewish people. The commentaries tell us that the way the tents were laid out were that the doors, the openings of the tents, were not facing the openings of the other tent. There was a certain level of modesty or privacy that the Jewish people were affording each other. Even though they were camping together, they weren't mixing into each other's business, if you will. They were giving each individual family, each individual unit, their own space to exist and to thrive in their own individual way. Some of the further commentaries elaborate a little bit more and tell us there's actually something more to this than just a level of privacy and a level of modesty. But what is really going on over here is Bilam is noticing that they are actually not distracted by each other. And what I mean by that is, We know in America today there's a concept of keeping up with the Joneses, meaning to say if the neighbor next door gets a new car, then all of a sudden you think, oh, perhaps I need to get a new car too. And if they get an even newer car, oh, maybe I need to get an even newer car as well. If they get a Tesla, maybe I need to get a Tesla. And there is this human natural phenomena where we notice what's going on around us and react to it accordingly. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes not so much. And what Bilam was noticing is they weren't distracted by each other. Each family was pursuing its own potential, its own interests, without being a source of distraction to the neighbors next door, to the Jewish family that was around them. And this is obviously a very virtuous, very important lesson for everyday life, where yes, it's possible that other people are doing certain things a certain way, which may or may not mean that we should learn from that. It could be that's their unique opportunity, that's their unique journey, and we should pursue our unique journey and our unique potential independent of what others may be doing. But then there's a further dimension which is pretty powerful as well. If you notice, the phraseology in this passage is a double expression of acknowledgement. First, he says how beautiful, or how matovu, how good are your tents, O Jacob. And then he goes on to say mishkenotecha, your dwelling places, O Israel. A double emphasis and a double description. So to understand this, I'd like to share a story about the beautiful neighborhood of Crown Heights, which I lived in for many years and still love to go back and visit. And this is a neighborhood in Brooklyn where in the 1950s, the Jewish community was just beginning to settle there. And a family moved into the neighborhood who were looking for a source of livelihood, and they started a kosher grocery store. They were the first kosher grocery store in the neighborhood, and they got started and things were going okay. A couple of years later, another family moved into town, and they too were looking for a way to support the family. And they looked around and said, you know what, maybe we'll start a grocery store as well. And as you can imagine, the first grocery store owner was not too pleased, especially considering the fact that the second store was located exactly 1 block from the first store. Things got pretty sour pretty quickly, went back and forth, and they disagreed and they argued, and it wasn't very pleasant. Until one day, one of the store owners said to the other, you know what? Why don't we go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe? He lives his synagogue, his office is just a few blocks away. Let's go and get his advice. Whatever he says, that's what we'll do. And they go to the Rebbe, they make an appointment, and they're standing in front of the Rebbe's desk and sharing their perspective, their side of the story, what their challenges and complaints are. And the Rebbe listens to the first store owner very intently and very carefully, and then listens to the second store owner. And after listening for a while, the Rebbe says in Yiddish, Sizda genuk fabeda. There's enough for both. And he gave them a blessing, they should both be successful, and they walked out. After they left the Rebbe's room, they looked at each other and they said, we've agreed that we're going to just accept what the Rebbe guides us to do. So I'm happy with you being here, you're happy with me being here, and let's live a happy life. So the first store owner says, no, I actually want to do something different. He said, I know that, first of all, I'm happy that we got the Rebbe's blessing, and I know that that's worth everything, but I know that you're struggling a little bit. What I want to do is lend you $1,000. This is $1,000 back in the 1950s, so that you can really jumpstart your business and enable it to thrive. And this story is obviously a very powerful, moving story, but I think it is really an expression of what the words of Bilam are. How beautiful are your dwelling places, O Israel. Not only how good are your tents, which may be referring to the level of privacy and modesty, or the level of unique individual perspective that we all retain for ourselves. But here is being shared how beautiful Mishkanotecha Yisrael, how beautiful your dwelling places, O Israel. Not only do you tolerate the person next door, you assist the person next door, which is a complete turnaround from not being influenced in a negative way to actually assisting another neighbor, another family, another member of the community to achieve their goals, to achieve their spiritual and material objectives. This is obviously in complete contrast to the friendship that was forged between Balak and Bilam, the Moabite king and the Midianite prophet, who collaborated in hate to undermine the Jewish people. The Jewish people unify in love to support each other. And this is what Bilam was noticing. This is the powerful ability that every Jew, every member of the tribe possesses to unite, to connect, to support one another in the most unconditional and most profound manner. This is the strength of the Jewish people. This is the prophecy that Bilam was able to articulate and see. And hopefully we can see that in each other as well. Shabbat Shalom.